I'm Rob Dietz.
I'm Asher Miller.
And I'm Jason Bradford. Welcome to Crazy Town, where 3D printers at FedEx now serve takeout.
Yummy.
Hi, this is producer Melody Allison. Thanks for joining us in Crazy Town, where Jason, Rob, and Asher tackle crazy-making topics like climate change, overshoot, runaway capitalism, and why we're all deluding ourselves. Here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Now, on to the show.
Hey, Jason Asher. You guys know that I've had this policy almost my entire adult life of avoid the news, don't pay any attention to it.
Yes, you remind us of this.
That's why I keep sending you more and more horrific things to see if I can break you.
You do send me horrific things, and a lot of them come from the New York Times, which I feel like I've been somewhat force-fed, because here at PCI, we've got this subscription to the New York Times, and I every morning look at their summary of the news. Now, I am good at just skimming through the quote-unquote news part, and I mostly go play the crossword and strands and connections, whatever their little word
I'm so
games.
glad we've got the subscription so
That's
that
how
you
they
can do
make
that.
their money nowadays, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're very high on themselves. Their motto is all the news that's fit to print, but somehow I managed to ignore it.
And that's complete BS, of course.
What is? All the news that's fit to print?
Yeah, so this is what's interesting. You wonder, right? Because if you read something from the New York Times and it's not something you know much about, you might just kind of nod along and say, oh, they've got reporters that know what they're talking about and editors, and these are serious people and blah, blah. But then every once in a while, you read something you know a lot about and you want to tear what hair is left out of your body. And this happened to me recently.
That explains a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
You had this enormous afro
it was
3 weeks ago.
I know. Yeah, I had hair like yours. It was incredible. I just run my fingers through it. Oh,
Yeah.
luscious.
This is what I do all day, Jason.
Yeah. Anyhow,
I need a haircut.
this article was titled "What to Eat on a Burning Planet."
Barbecue, right?
I'm guessing it's charred.
Yeah. And you would think someone like me who's concerned about climate change, I'd be into this, right? Like, hey, how are we going to feed ourselves in the future with climate change and resource depletion? What are we going to do? And I wrote an entire book about this topic. So I'm figuring maybe they're referencing the future as rural, right? Obviously, they would do that.
Right.
Turns out, no, they don't care at all about anything I ever said. And they went what's called...
And so you're greatly offended. This is what upsets you. This is why it's not fit to print. Because it doesn't quote you.
Why should the New York Times be any different from the members of your family or your friends?
Exactly. This basically is a full-throated, throttled, whatever you want to call it, promotion.
Throated, throttled?
Yeah. Promotion of what would be called ecomodernism, right? Ecomodernists are kind of my nemesis.
That's what we're going to eat in a burning planet, are ecomodernists.
I know this is a regular recurring topic here on Crazy Town, but let's just take a quick minute to look at what is an eco-modernist. And I would say you can loosely define that as someone who's completely aware that we have existential risk from climate, from being an overshoot. They recognize the importance of energy to the way we live today in modern society. But here's the divergence. They will not acknowledge limits. They see how important energy is. They see that we have real threats. But the idea is they want to double down on more industrialism, more technology.
As the only way to solve the problems that, in fact, those things created.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it's like they see that past industrial activity and technology put us in overshoot, but they can never get to this idea of let's scale it back. So that's kind of the eco-modernist, trust in technology.
And it's kind of become the default mode of most so-called, a lot of so-called greens and environmentalists. So the ones that get all the money in the world tend to be eco-modernist leaning, right? So the New York Times runs this series of 7 articles starting in July and August for a couple of weeks, and then they finished with this piece in December was actually the one I actually found and read, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is not a one-off stupid article. This is a series of really bad articles.
Well, Jason, they had to get all the news that's fit to print, not just one article's worth of news.
Now, I want to pause and try to contain myself here. The writers are actually grappling with thorny problems, things I really care about: biodiversity loss, climate, water pollution, aquifer depletion, and that agriculture, and they describe well how agriculture contributes mightily to these and may actually be impacted by these. So that there's a recursive sort of feedback where, if you deplete your topsoil too much, you can't really farm it anymore. So they acknowledge all this, and it seems like they're trying their best to offer well-meaning suggestions, and which is kind of sad, but because they're horrible suggestions. But anyhow, I think that for a lot of these people, I'd probably get along with them. All right, they're nice enough folks in general. All right, and you can kind of get I'm going to give you a quote from the introductory article that sort of lines out this series by the other, saying that these articles coming up will offer us a glimpse of a future growing closer by the day, in which our food may be grown in vast, sustainably managed factory farms, and water is pumped across the country from the Great Lakes to California. I hope you'll find ideas to marinate on.
Worst pun ever to end that
It's a
quote.
very barfable quote, but that sort of sets the tone.
Quote. I like it.
Yeah.
That's the future of food.
In fact, Jason, your keyboard is now crusty from when you vomited the first time you read this.
It smells kind of acidic still.
Well, at least the editor, I'm assuming it's she,
Yes.
said may be grown.
Yes.
Right. But the range of options that are being presented here. And in fact, the series starts with an article by David Wallace Wells, who's, a really well-known writer, particularly around climate issues, wrote a best-selling book, and I think after that wound up joining the New York Times. And his piece, was titled "Food as You Know is About to Change," and he actually did. I'll give him credit. I mean, these are, especially the writers at New York Times, not maybe contributing op-ed people, but the writers. They're steeped in journalism. He clearly did a lot of work, really trying to understand and lay out some of the challenges of feeding a growing population in the future. And he actually quotes a guy, and I think it's worth sharing what he said, because it I think is a fairly good encapsulation of some of the challenges we're facing. So he lays out what this guy from NASA, Jonas Jägermeyer, calls the challenge of our generation, right? And I'm quoting here: how to save the food system from what he calls a quadruple squeeze. First, the problem of productivity and hunger. Second, the risk to ecosystems under threat from fertilizer runoff, deforestation, and other pollution. Third, the challenge of nutritional deficiency, as those foods we're growing more of are generally getting worse for us over time. And finally, climate, which is driving a, quote, fundamental change across most bread baskets on the planet. It's pretty complicated, this is Jägermeyer, says, he admits, and the scary part is that we have to solve them all. So I think it's a fairly good, of course, a lot of the challenges he lays out here are, in fact, created by the industrial agricultural system that we've created.
Yeah, it totally squares with what you were saying, Jason. Like, these writers get the scene correct. And it totally squares with what I was saying about ecomodernism. Like, the ecomodernists understand the existential threats. It's just the flip side. Once we've laid out the preamble, what are the therefores that come after?
David Wallace Wells throws out basically
it's pretty casually throws out
some assumptions,
yes.
Right? I mean, he narrows the aperture of what is viewed as being possible, just like the editor in that introductory piece. The range of options, the possible, food future or a certain thing, and it's basically all techno-optimistic kind of eco stuff. And he just tosses out, in trying to lay out the challenge of agriculture, he's like, well, it's a lot harder than what's happening with the renewable energy transition, which we figured out. Like we
Yes.
totally figured out how to electrify the energy sector. And we've even figured out how to solve like tricky things like how we make steel and cement without fossil fuels, which is, excuse me?
I
We
know.
solved those things. We figured those things out. We could do those things at scale. We've actually done the energy transition. Like that's all solved.
All done. Just finished.
That was so fascinating. So yes, he's like, sorry, we're gonna have plenty of electricity. We're gonna have plenty of steel and cement. No problem without fossil fuels.
Yeah.
But we may not be able to feed ourselves, guys. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. Massive R&D in basically doing to agriculture and the food system what we've done already and solved for energy and materials.
Exactly.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
I've just been flabbergasted the whole time I'm reading all this stuff.
So David Wallace Wells is kind of doubling down. We need more R&D, more tech. Well, I paid special attention to the article that was on water. And this one was written by an actual hydrologist, academic, a guy named Jay Familietti. And
Familietti. You got to say it the
beautiful
right way
Italian last name. He goes over the problem of groundwater depletion, especially in the West. So you have places like the Central Valley of California. You've got the lower Colorado River basin. You've got the Ogallala Aquifer, that huge area east of the Rocky Mountains, that like Nebraska down to Texas and New Mexico. And we've just been draining that groundwater to feed crops in what are essentially deserts, or at least pretty low rain areas.
This guy lives in Phoenix, by the way.
Yeah.
He's a professor at the University of Arizona State.
His thesis is the U.S. has not really addressed the problem. We are depleting these aquifers that are filled with water that's from centuries or even millennia ago, and they do not replenish at the rate that we're draining them. And so we're going to run into a problem. And he doesn't like the only solution that he proposes, really, which is that we partially drain the Great Lakes, pipe water across the country in what he calls an expensive and unpopular project.
So that's the only option he presents?
Well, he presents that as an option, but he says we need to avoid that. So what he says, in order to avoid it, we've got to prioritize the exploration and evaluation of what we have in the groundwater supplies in these places. Okay, so study how much we actually have. And then his big idea is, and to make a plan to end or dramatically reduce groundwater depletion.
But this is just absurd.
Well,
There's no option. I mean, you cannot sustainably harvest groundwater. It's saying we either pipe from the Great Lakes or we learn what we've got and then we can't use it. So what's the point?
You guys are all wrong. Familiarity is wrong. I want to talk about another great hydrologist. In fact, the hydrologist in chief. Our new returned President Donald Trump, because he's got a solution for this problem. And maybe I'll just share this clip. He was talking about it, during the campaign.
I can't wait.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, ready?
Mm-hmm. So you have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet. And you turn the faucet, and it takes one day to turn it. It's massive. It's as big as the wall of that building right there behind you. And you turn that, and all of that water goes aimlessly into the Pacific. And if they turned it back, all of that water would come right down.
See, so problem solved, right, guys?
There's a faucet somewhere. It could be up in Canada. Not very clear, but there's a faucet.
You just turn it in one day.
Yeah, and one day you turn it, and then we get all the water we need.
That's all you have to do, guys. There's a faucet. Somebody built this faucet. We just need to turn it.
There's so many awesome things here. First of all, I'm pretty sure Trump thinks that because it's in the north and a map has the north at the top, that the water flows down the map from Canada to California,
right.
Not that it goes actual downhill. I also love that the faucet is huge. You think of a faucet that would control all of the water flowing off the Rockies and the Cascades, and it's the size of a building that's behind him.
But that's huge, Rob.
And then he starts with his hands making this turning motion, like there's somebody who's going to get out there and just spend a day.
Yeah, all you got to do is turn the faucet. Yeah, that's good.
Like Arnold Schwarzenegger in what was that movie Arnold Schwarzenegger was in? Conan, where he's like walking in a circle to grind grain or something like that. I don't know, but it was
he's like playing the role of the horse, right?
Yes,
just
so
turning
there's somebody like that whose job is to turn that faucet.
Well, Trump would love to put Arnold back into that faucet turning role. But look, okay, great. The hydrologist in chief. That's a great title. But let's go back to the real hydrologist who does understand something about ecology, this Professor Familietti. I mean, if he's going to go ecomodernism, why stop at the Great Lakes? You guys know that some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn have water on them. Let's just make a plan to export water from there back to the deserts of California and Arizona and Texas so that we can grow alfalfa to feed cows that are raised in the deserts of Saudi Arabia.
You think we could create just like a pipe from some of those moons to Earth and just have the water come directly?
A flex tube, but yeah.
It'll take two faucets. You have to turn two faucets to get it from Saturn. If you take his logic all the way, like you were kind of alluding to a bit earlier, Jason, it really means an end to growth and an entirely different economy and culture. Or you're just talking about privatizing these last bits of aquifer and a few powerful people own the water in these places.
There are people that are like scoping this out and trying to buy groundwater as aggressively as possible. Hedge funds and private equity. This is a real thing going on.
I mean, we already have large corporations, Nestle, others who own water rights all over the world.
Yes.
They're already doing this. It's
doubling down on this.
Yeah.
Now, he never mentions option 3.
What's that? What's option 3?
Well, this is what I talked about on New York Times in my Futures Rule report 2019. Move people to where water is.
Oh, so instead of moving water to where people are in the desert.
Yeah. Now, here's what's funny is the New York Times will do all these climate migration articles where they're going to talk about but they never in this situation they don't actually talk about moving people. So I don't know why there's zero dots being connected. Like little kids drawing on little books connecting dots could do a better job than these supposedly professional reporters and editors who should have a good view of the whole landscape that they're dealing with.
You can't move Arizona State University.
Correct.
So that he can keep his job.
There we go.
Because you have to change the name of it.
Yes.
Like the Great Lakes University or something else. Like that's too difficult.
Yeah.
So let's just make a pipeline that goes thousands of miles.
Or maybe he could work for Great Pipeline University.
We need to basically get in some right relationship of what's sustainable, but so far these guys have no idea what that means. And this was driven home by the final article, which is the one that drew my attention in the series. A journalist, Michael Grunwald, this article is called "Sorry, but This is the Future of Food." And this is a great title because the content and tone of the piece, like he knows he's going to be unpopular when he writes this. And oh, is he ever unpopular? The comments that came back on this article
really?
Were livid about this.
Oh, interesting.
And he tries to answer this Davis Wallace Wells article early on, sort of set up like, I don't know how we're going to do this. I'm a little scared. And his answer is more of the same. We're going to try harder and we're going to be cleaner, but it's basically going to be a giant industrial food system. And suck it, basically, is what he says.
Well, he's extremely condescending, basically, about alternatives to that industrial factory farm future, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
extremely.
Yeah, you guys once again made me read this, so I had to read another condescending, wrong article flowing out of the New York Times or out of the mainstream media or anywhere. And one thing's really clear. This guy loves technology, not surprisingly for an eco-modernist. But he starts going on about combines and talking about how the bigger the combine, the greater the harvest you get. And I don't quite see how that works. I mean, maybe the faster the harvest, but how the hell do you How do you get more corn just because you have a bigger combine? He's talking about like a 500 horsepower combine. Let's get him a 100,000 horsepower combine. Let's see how much more corn.
I think that's really telling. It's like if the demand is there, then of course the supply is going to always be to meet the demand, right? So you could look at that similarly to everyone's going to want to eat meat, so we're going to have to have a lot more meat in the future. Yes. Everyone on Earth is going to want to use energy as wastefully as we do. So there's going to be more energy just because everyone wants it, right? So if you have a huge combine harvester, of course there's going to be more for it to harvest.
Yeah, and the thing that can really increase meat production, whether you're talking poultry, beef, pork, is large combines.
There is this sort of technology fetish. There's this kind of wow factor going on when he talks about it. And there's a real kind of almost like disgust of anything that smacks of romanticism or idealism. And so it's fascinating. He uses terms like, old McDonald and, artisanal grains and where animals have their own names. Those are like worse than chemically drenched corn and feedlot fattened beef.
Yeah, I mean, he literally says their artisanal grains and grass-fed beef are worse for nature than chemical drenched corn and feedlot fattened beef because they require much more land for each calorie they produce.
And this is the key: is that there's this whole discussion about efficiency. They like to talk about efficiencies.
Yeah.
And it's completely bogus. But again, it's one of those things that they throw it out there authoritatively, like David Wallace Wells with, like, we solve the energy issue.
Yeah.
And there's so much more nuance here. And there's no definition. Now, if you're an engineer and you say, I've increased the efficiency, you've got a numerator and denominator. You've got a goal, an output goal. That's the numerator. And the denominator is the units of whatever input you're interested in tracking. So it's always a output over an input. And here they care tremendously about yield per area. That's the efficiency they seem to care about. But the problem is that that's not the way the world works in terms of sustaining the soil. It's being driven obviously by piling on fertilizers and herbicides like crazy, and it's this treadmill you're on that you can't stop. And so they don't define it, and it's actually not necessarily the goal that if you are a good agronomist or a soil scientist or a human being living on the planet, that's not the goal you're going to care about. And what's interesting is, they also talk about how these artisanal, organic, regenerative farms are probably not going to yield as much. And since we have to get more yield per area, because if we don't, we're going to have to expand and cut down more forests. So they draw this logical line, and it's not really this is all debatable stuff. And so a lot of this has to do with how you draw system boundaries. And one of the things that's interesting, and it gets to what you were saying, Asher, is that we overproduce like you wouldn't believe. Like 40% of the U.S. corn crop is going to ethanol to basically be a energetic break even to be 10% of our gasoline. So that's an absurdity, right? That's an absurdity.
Oh, it sounds logical to me.
Let's look also, Jason, you're talking about outputs per input. I mean, yield over land area. What about the pollution and the risk of bird flu and other diseases like that come from that small area, from cramming too many cows in one small space, too many chickens in one small space?
By the way, we're just not even acknowledging the suffering and the experience of these living beings, right?
Right. And the thing is, because the efficiency that actually is happening, the actual efficiency that the market is suggesting we do is reduce labor and mechanize more, because labor in an industrial society is the highest cost of production. And when we have cheap fuels, they can substitute for labor. You're going to do stuff like build factory farms, including piling animals in. So this was what happens. As soon as you get to these then artisanal old McDonald style places, what they're doing is they're more labor inefficient. They look from a labor perspective bad. There's a system boundary problem. if someone compares like a factory chicken now raised outside on a artisanal farm, that chicken does pretty poorly. It has been adapted, it's been selected for these factory conditions. That is the same for almost every crop we grow. So if you do a side-by-side study and say, how's this corn crop do in this sort of regenerative organic system, doesn't do so hot. Well, guess what? The genetics of the corn is actually moved to need to have those fertilizers and those herbicides. This gets back to, some of the problem we have with boundary definitions. If you start breeding for other systems with living soils, systems that are actually worried about nutrition and not just yield, that's another problem that was identified. We're having lower nutrition crops.
Yeah.
Then you maybe need less food actually, because you're getting actually better, mineral density and vitamins and stuff, and you don't need to eat so much to compensate for diminished food quality. So when you do side-by-side studies where you actually look at systems, the systems that are more diverse, more regenerative, end up producing better once you actually put the system in the right context and then do a comparison. I'm sorry, I lost you.
Nutrition is secondary to profit.
Well, that's, yeah.
And if we have to eat less to get the nutrition that we need,
yes,
then how does the profit thing work?
Well, that's the thing. The system is set up to maximize profit and to maximize yield. And so obviously these guys are completely missing the point. They have no answer to, okay, if we're going to double down on this industrial food system where fossil fuels are in everything, and the tractors and the fertilizer and the drying and the processing and the packaging and the shipping and the mega retail space and in our cooking, and it's leading to soil erosion, water drawdown, and pollution. They have zero answer to that. They just say we're going to get more efficient somehow at this.
We could sit here and very reasonably shit on the logic or the illogic of some of the arguments. But I think for me, what really stands out again, and this gets back to the eco-modernist worldview, is it seems like in this entire series, all of these different authors are operating with this sort of assumption that the thing that cannot be changed is our behavior.
Right.
The thing that cannot be changed is the fact that there's going to be more demand for things, or that we have a food system that's operated by businesses that are seeking to maximize their profits and efficiency and all these things. Like these things are non-negotiable. People have to live in the fucking desert in Arizona and in the Southwest, right? Those things can't change. So we have to figure out how to get water to them. And it just reminds me again of, and I've talked about this on this podcast too much, but the thing that probably broke my brain for the final, unrecoverable time, and I was watching Jeff Bezos's, presentation when he launched his stupid space company, where he's like laying out the logic of the challenges we understand it, of energy being so critical to human society, and that we're hitting limits with energy, even limits to efficiency gains and all this stuff, just laying out the challenge. And then he's like, we're presented with only two options.
Right.
One is to use less, which he calls rationing. And the other is to go harvest the fucking moon and put 1 trillion people into space, and that's like this absurd representation, illustration of the same logic that I see in these articles, which is like, it is inconceivable that we would change how we eat, right, versus in how we grow food
and where we live.
So instead, we're going to have to do all this other stuff, and of course, it's going to be industrial, right?
One thing that was really interesting to me in the Grunwald article is the artwork that accompanied it. There's this illustration by this guy, Sam Whitney, and it's got a skyscraper, basically a barn extruded into a skyscraper on this farm field, and there's cow heads hanging out the windows as you go up into the sky in this really tall barn. And what I'm trying to figure out is is this illustrator on our side or on their side? Because
All right.
it's kind of ridiculous, obviously, sort of eco-modern. Cows are just going to be enjoying themselves, leaning out the 10th floor of the building, having a good time.
Right. There's never any kind of big picture look at the system like we're getting it. It's like making a few simplifying assumptions and then hammering a certain track. And this guy, he's constantly, talking about on this farm, this technology, And honestly, that's like not where the major problems are. I mean, farms got major problems, obviously, with erosion and stuff. But in terms of energy and material use, it's off the farm is actually a bigger deal.
Yeah, let's go back to your book, Jason, The Future is Rural, which had the best editor of all time.
It did.
Yours truly.
I wonder where he is now. I mean, he must be famous.
Yeah, incredible.
Busy.
I'm gonna have to leave. There's no room for me with the egos that you
I know.
have.
Here's the book I wrote. Here's the book I edited. What the hell did you do a share? You read it, right?
Yeah.
You're the best reader of all time.
He was very helpful.
Well, so there's you put a nice chart together in there, Jason.
Actually, I did the charts.
Well, there we go then.
Okay.
I'm actually praising you.
Put it on the bag, baby.
Yeah.
You did. They're beautiful.
So this chart's looking at how much energy is required to produce and deliver food versus the calories that we obtain from eating that food. And it's roughly 13 calories of energy to produce 1 calorie of food. Or if you eliminate all the food waste, it would be something more like 8 calories of energy input to get 1 calorie of food. I don't see us eliminating food waste anytime soon, but let's be optimistic. Mm-hmm. And what the eco-modernists in this whole series of articles don't seem to understand is that energy input is characteristic of this industrial food system. So what you're talking about, Jason, it's not just how you grow it. It's what are you packaging it in? What kind of trucks are you loading it onto? Let's say that we did pipe water from the Great Lakes down to the deserts in California and Texas and Arizona, wherever. I mean, how much energy is that going to take, first of all? And then once you've grown the food there, you got to send it back to the people that live in the Great Lakes region.
Yes.
How are you doing that? You're going to use a transporter beam and just transport it directly into people's stomachs?
What are the roads made out of? Anyone know?
Well, they're made out of that electrified concrete, right? That we've solved.
Right. So this is the thing. It's like, you've got an oil refinery and it has these like hydrocrackers and these fractions and stuff. And there's stuff at the bottom that's heavy, the tar, the bitumen. I mean, do you know how much of that we use? No. And so this is what's crazy is no one talks about the system at all. And it just floors me that they're this ignorant. And so sure, make a fossil fuel free, emissions completely free farm. And I don't care. It will make zero difference for the problem of getting highly processed factory food to the mega store in the city where everyone's showing up in a car on asphalt. I don't care if they're electric or anything. It makes no freaking difference. So this is a structural problem that they don't talk about, like you're saying, Asher.
Yes, there's a structural problem there. There's a systems thinking problem there. But ultimately, I think there's a psychological problem here. And that is, we live, and we've talked about this a lot, we live in a system that the physical infrastructure of how we exist, right? People living in cities really divorced from the source of their sustenance, right?
Yeah.
The very thing that they need to actually exist.
Yes.
More than anything else, they're as divorced from it as humans have ever been.
Yes.
Anywhere on Earth, right? In kind of the modern environments that we have, and that shapes what we think of as possible and necessary, right? So imagining something different in a real way means that we have to actually imagine us living differently, and maybe we actually can't live in a high-rise building in a dense urban city, not having to be engaged at all with how food is grown.
Right.
And that's that's scary, right? It's scary, and maybe it even raises the the fear of death. Like, I don't know how to do any of that stuff. I mean, I relate to that. I couldn't possibly sustain myself right now,
Right.
even if I had a farm to go do it. On so
You do, but
so it just kind of I have access to. I'm fortunate, but I wouldn't know how to do that, right? And
we're working towards it together.
I know we are, thank God. But so many people are not.
Right. It's terrifying. I get it.
And so it's like we've now constrained what we can see as possible or required
Yes.
because of those conditions.
Yeah, and that constraint is it's a real set of blinders that we wear. Our good friend and colleague here at Post Carbon Institute, Richard Heinberg, gave a presentation recently, and his final slide in that presentation laid out our choices. He said that we have three choices. One is we could support policies that would work but are political non-starters. We could have, the second choice is we could have policies that are politically acceptable but don't work. And then he's kind of left this third choice of what if there is no third category? And
Oh, nice.
it really fits well with this discussion of ecomodernism in food, because I think what the three of us are saying is we should support policies that would work, but they're political non-starters for the psychological reasons you just laid out, Asher, for the kind of the infrastructure around the food system that you laid out, Jason. And so what we're doing are policies that are politically acceptable but don't work. I mean, in the case of the groundwater, we're not tracking how much is being depleted. We're just going at it like it's this awesome free resource, which it has been, but we're in trouble and it's not going to work.
And we're talking about the stupidest things like, okay, let's get water from the Great Lake or turn on some giant spigot from Canada. And so this is the thing, okay? The third category is this. I'm going to try to answer the third category.
Oh, okay.
We, in families and communities, are basically going to be on our own. I mean, by that I mean there's no politician. Okay, we heard from one of this episode. I don't think he's got a solution. There's no professor. We heard from professors. No, I don't think they got any real solutions. Or technologists. None of them are going to come to our rescue. And so I think we have to kind of figure this out on our own, and that is pretty scary, honestly.
Yeah, and it can be really tough for those of us, unlike you, who live on a farm and are trying to do right by the land and grow food. Yeah, but here in the city, it's even tougher. But there are things you can do. I mean, I've actually embarked on a little experiment here this year with Whole Foods plant-based diet. Trying to get a little smaller in the footprint, and it comes with the added bonus of being healthier as well. There are other options available too, getting to know the farmers that are nearby, participating in farmers markets, subscribing to community supported agriculture, CSA. I mean, they're small things, but it does help get you outside of that space that you're talking about, Jason, of this. There's no technology driven savior coming down to fix all this. So the more you can kind of be in relationship with those who are producing food, and the more of that you can do on your own, the better off you are.
I mean, if you break this down into sort of a different version of categories, you're talking about some things you can do, Rob, as a consumer, as an eater, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to source things differently, changing diet, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's also things that we can do, each of us in our own ways and under our own circumstances, to be part of the production of food a little bit more. So building skills, whether that's trying to have your own garden if you have a small plot of land, learning how to even grow food, understanding things. I mean, we don't have, in my house, we live in trees. We don't have a great situation to grow our own food. And thankfully we have a relationship with a farmer, some schmuck.
Yeah, he's not very good, but
and
we're
part of this farming club where we can go and learn skills and help grow some food that we also get.
Yeah.
And not everyone's in a situation where they know a farmer and they can go do that, but there are things you could definitely do to build your skill set. And then there's kind of the, maybe call it the infrastructure of supporting more bioregional and sustainable food systems around you. And that could be partly through the purchasing, like you said, in a CSA, Rob, but it could also be supporting organizations that are trying to build that infrastructure. There are food hubs that have been created in different places and other organizations that are trying to rebuild these more sustainable localized food systems. So supporting them through donations or volunteering or whatever it is, or pushing for some local policy. I know you said no politicians are going to solve this, Jason, but if we have any recourse politically, it's probably more on the local level.
Yeah, local, sure. I agree with the local that can have some impact. Now let me take it from the perspective of somebody who is a farmer, not just an okay one, just kind of mediocre, but at least I try to farm and help farm. And I have land that I rent out to other farmers. So if you happen to be one of these people that is managing farm properties, there are a lot of things you can do. And one of them is I want to first say something about this idea that there's places that protect biodiversity and there's farms which just basically obliterate it, which is the attitude that this guy in the article was getting at. Yeah. And that's completely bogus as well. There's plenty of farmers who actually farm that way. Most of the big industrial farmers I know don't care at all about what they're doing on the farm in terms of biodiversity. But if you do, and if you make an effort, it's incredible what will happen. The soil life feeds, the fact that we have good, healthy soil, and I've compared the soil here to the neighboring farm, like literally 100 feet away. There's a whole ecosystem below ground that, feeds animals that are feeding all these bird life and insects. The bees are having, burying themselves down there, the ground dwelling bees. There's whole hedgerows and stuff like that where there's insects that are making homes in that. There's birds that are perching and finding shelter. And in terms of birding, this farm here was the second most species-rich bird location as a private yard in the entire state of Oregon last year.
This is the only reason you do farming at all on this level, right? Is because you want to get your bird numbers up.
Well, I do find it fascinating.
It's a different form of efficiency.
I do find it fascinating that I think that this place, the way we're managing it, with a lot of diversity and care for the soil and using all these edge spaces as habitat, is a way to support biodiversity. And I think there's research to support this from other locations. This is not a one-off, I'm saying. And so I do not believe in this sort of separation between human-managed ecosystems and completely natural ecosystems. There's gradations.
By the way, for tens of thousands of years, humans didn't either.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So this is a weird thing that the ecomodernists, urbanites have no comprehension of. And when you're out here observing this, you can see the difference in how properties are managed and what that means for other living creatures. And so providing a place for other species, thinking of an ecosystem, thinking of a landscape that's diverse, and then if you own property, trying to figure out a way to have relationships with small farmers to give them an opportunity to do the things that they will do, because I don't think these big mega farms are gonna survive what's coming, and we need to have this huge uprising of small farms in the future. And so, anyway, that I think we covered it from a number of different angles, and this I feel better now.
Yeah, you guys have inspired me. In fact, to share your building skills. Like I've put a pawpaw patch in the postage stamp of my backyard. I've got 6 pawpaws, 2 of which are almost, you could call them little trees. Mm-hmm. And they're 5 years old. So over the last 5 years, I've produced exactly 0 pawpaws. And but I promise you, this year, whatever pawpaws I get, I'm bringing them down to the farm. I'm sharing them with you guys. My skill level might be 0 pawpaw, but you will benefit. You'll get as much pawpaw as I get.
You know what, Rob? I'm making you the pawpaw man, and you're going to come down here, and we're going to plant a big row of pawpaws, and we're going to be eating so many pawpaws.
I love it.
In 20 years. We're going to be loving it. All right?
Hey, make some
years.
plans for the future, people.
All right, think ahead. Think like a pawpaw tree.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Now that the oligarchs and oil sheiks have a locked, firm grip on politics and finance, we can all agree nothing will be done to stave off the worst effects of global heating. As temperatures are set to soar higher than a hot tub in Hades, Phoenix University is now offering a degree program in climate adaptation. How will the urban residents of one of the hottest places on Earth thrive in the coming decades? Find out by enrolling in the most trans-interdisciplinary course ever offered, bridging and fusing diverse and disparate knowledge systems and putting theory into praxis, including physics. From first principles, calculate how long you can stand naked in front of a glass building during summer at high noon before suffering third-degree burns. Culinary arts, tools and techniques to cook a gourmet family meal on an asphalt parking lot. Health and first aid, act fast and save lives if you or someone near you spontaneously combusts. Human physiology, simple test to see if a sample of human urine is safe to drink. Religious studies, breatharianism, the ancient practice of garnering sustenance from air and light alone. Geology, identifying rock layers suitable for carving out a habitable cave network. And music arts, gourds and rattles, creating the folk sounds of future Phoenix. Phoenix University rated the #1 sketchiest college by U.S. News and World Reports.
Crazy town, da 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 da, crazy town.